The adoption caseworker slid a photograph across the table and asked if I recognized the birth mother. I did. She was in my wedding album, standing next to my husband, her arm around his waist, at a Christmas party 2 years before I ever met him. I need you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this story. I need you to understand how much I loved that little boy before I knew any of it. Because if you don't understand that first, the rest of it won't make sense. The anger won't make sense. The way my hands shook for 3 days straight won't make sense. His name was Noah. He was 4 years old when we brought him home, and he had this habit of lining up his shoes by the front door every single night before bed, not because anyone told him to, but because someone at the group home had once praised him for it, and he'd held on to that moment like a lifeline. That detail alone broke my heart wide open the first time I saw it. This tiny person, so desperate to be good, so desperate to be kept. My name is Christine. I'd been married to my husband Daniel for 11 years by the time we started the adoption process. We'd tried everything else first: 4 rounds of IVF, 2 miscarriages, 1 surgery I don't like to talk about. By the time we sat in that adoption agency waiting room with our matching manila folders, we weren't starry-eyed newlyweds anymore. We were tired. We were grieving in a very specific, quiet way that people who haven't been through infertility don't fully recognize. But we were still together. That, I thought, was the thing that mattered. Daniel was a good husband in the ways that count from a distance. He remembered anniversaries. He cooked on Sundays. He held my hand at every medical appointment without being asked. He was handsome in that easy, unremarkable way. Dark hair going gray at the temples, laugh lines, a voice that made strangers trust him immediately. I trusted him, completely and without question, the way you trust the floor beneath your feet. You don't think about it. You just walk. We'd been on the waiting list for 14 months when the agency called about Noah. A 4-year-old boy, they said. No significant medical history. Birth mother had voluntarily relinquished rights. Open to a closed adoption. Was I sitting down? They always asked that, and I always said yes, and I was never actually sitting down. I was standing in the kitchen with my heart in my throat and my hand flat against the counter to keep the world from tilting. We met Noah 3 weeks later. He lined up his shoes that first night. I cried in the bathroom so he wouldn't see. The finalization appointment was scheduled for a Tuesday in March, 10 weeks after placement. Routine paperwork. The caseworker, a soft-spoken woman named Mrs. Albright, had asked us to come in separately for individual interviews first. Standard procedure, she said, just to confirm everything was progressing well. Daniel went in the morning. I came in after lunch. I was smiling when I sat down. I remember that specifically because of what happened next. I was smiling, and I had a coffee in my hand, and I was wearing the blue cardigan Noah had told me he liked because it was the color of his favorite crayon. Mrs. Albright put a photograph on the table. She said, "This is required disclosure. The birth mother has requested that both adoptive parents confirm they have no prior relationship with her before finalization is completed." She said it like it was a formality. She slid the photo over like it was nothing. The woman in the photograph was named Sasha Verne. I didn't recognize that name, but I recognized her face immediately because I had seen it roughly 40 times across 3 different holiday parties and a barbecue in the early years of my marriage. She was Daniel's ex, not a casual ex, his serious ex, the one he dated for almost 3 years before we met, the one he described when I once asked as just someone I knew before you. My coffee cup was still in my hand. I put it down very carefully so that I wouldn't drop it. "No," I said. "No prior relationship?" I signed what needed to be signed. I walked to my car. I sat in the parking lot for 45 minutes before I could drive. Here is what I did not do. I did not call Daniel. I did not cry. I did not spiral. I sat very still in that car, and I thought about Noah lining up his shoes, and I decided that whatever was happening, I was going to understand it completely before I made a single move. I went home and I made dinner and I helped Noah with his bath and I read him 2 chapters of Charlotte's Web and I kissed his forehead and I told him I'd see him in the morning. And then I went downstairs and I opened my laptop. What I found in the next 4 hours rearranged everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Sasha Verne had given birth to Noah 5 years ago, 8 months after Daniel and I got married. I did the math 3 times because I needed to be sure. 8 months. We had been married for 8 months when she had his baby. A baby she gave up. A baby who, 11 years later, we were in the process of adopting. The probability of this being coincidence was so small it wasn't worth calculating. I found her social media. She wasn't hard to find. What I found there was worse than what I'd imagined, which is saying something because I had imagined quite a lot in those 4 hours. She had photos, not of Noah. Those had been scrubbed, presumably at the agency's guidance. But she had photos of herself and Daniel. Recent photos? Not recent, but from maybe 2 years ago. A coffee shop, a park, both of them looking very comfortable in the way that people look when they've known each other a long time. The caption on one of them said simply, "Old friends." The comments said things like, "You two are adorable," and she hadn't corrected anyone. Daniel had told me he hadn't spoken to her since before we met. I closed the laptop. I went upstairs. I watched my husband sleep for a long moment. This man who held my hand at every doctor's appointment. This man whose voice made strangers trust him. And I thought, he knew. When the agency called about a 4-year-old boy with no significant medical history, he knew exactly whose child they were describing. He'd said yes, anyway. He had let me fall in love with that little boy without a single word of warning. The question I kept coming back to was, why? Not why had he stayed in contact with her. Not why had he hidden the child. But why, knowing everything he knew, had he said yes to adopting Noah? Was it guilt? Was it some warped sense of making things right? Or had Sasha somehow engineered this? Found a way to place her son specifically with us? I didn't sleep. In the morning, I made Noah's breakfast. I braided my daughter's hair. Did I mention? We also had a daughter, Lily, 11, from before the infertility. She was the one steady thing in all of this. I braided Lily's hair, and I sent both kids to school, and I waited for Daniel to finish his coffee. "We need to talk," I said. He looked up. Husbands always know that tone. His face arranged itself into something carefully neutral. "What's wrong?" "Sasha Verne," I said. The coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. That was all the confirmation I needed, honestly. That half-second pause was an entire confession. "Christine, how long have you known Noah was your son?" He put the cup down. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at the table. "Since before placement," he said. Quietly. Like the quietness might help. I had thought I was prepared for him to say it. I was not prepared. "You let me fall in love with him," I said. My voice was extraordinarily calm. I've thought about that since. How calm I was. "You sat in that agency, and you held my hand, and you let me fall in love with a child without telling me he was yours. He needed a home, Christine. He needed us. He needed a home. You're right. He deserved a real home, with a real family, and two parents who both walked in there with the same information. I stood up. Were you planning to tell me? Ever? After the finalization? After he was ours, and it was too late for me to make any kind of informed choice about any of this? I didn't think you'd say yes if you knew. That sentence hit me like a door swinging open into my face. He was right. And he knew he was right. And he had made the decision for me anyway. And Sasha? I said. Is she done? Was this her idea? Placing him with you, specifically? The silence lasted just a beat too long. It was mutual, he said. We both thought it was best. He had been in contact with her throughout our entire adoption process. They had agreed together to place his child in our home without telling me. They had decided together what was best for my family. I left the kitchen. I went upstairs. I made a phone call. My brother-in-law is a family law attorney. My sister's husband, Ted. I called Ted first, then I called my sister. Then I made one more call to a woman I'd met at a charity board 2 years earlier who happened to be a financial forensic specialist, because if Daniel had been managing money and contact with another woman and an entire secret child for years, I wanted someone looking at our accounts before he knew I was looking. The next 4 weeks were the most deliberate of my life. I did not confront Daniel again. I was careful and I was quiet, and I was, to all outward appearances, a woman processing a marital crisis privately, which was exactly what he thought I was doing. He was apologetic. He was attentive. He brought home flowers twice, which I put in the vase on the kitchen counter and let die naturally. Ted confirmed that Daniel's rights to Noah were something the court would have to assess. The voluntary relinquishment had been clean, legally, but the circumstances of the adoption were not. What it meant, practically, was that the adoption could proceed with me as sole adoptive parent, if I chose to pursue it that way. In our state, under these specific circumstances, with the documentation of what Daniel had done, I had a path. The forensic specialist found 17 months of cash withdrawals, irregular and small enough to avoid notice. He had been giving Sasha money, not vast amounts. Enough. Enough to tell me exactly what kind of guilt he'd been carrying, and exactly how long he'd been carrying it. I filed for divorce on a Thursday morning in April, 6 days before Noah's finalization was originally scheduled. I had already, through Ted, petitioned to continue the adoption as a single parent. The agency, once Mrs. Albright understood the full picture, was cooperative. Daniel, served with papers at his office, called me 4 times in 1 hour. I let it go to voicemail, every call. His voice on those messages moved from disbelief to anger to something that sounded a lot like genuine grief, and I felt all of those things too, distantly, like weather in another county. Noah's finalization was rescheduled to a Friday in May. It was a clear morning, the kind where the light comes through in long, flat strips, and everything looks a little more solid than usual. Noah wore his best shirt, a dark green button-up he called his fancy shirt. He was 5 by then. He held my hand the whole time. Lily sat next to us and held his other hand. When it was done, when the judge signed everything and smiled at us over her reading glasses, Noah looked up at me with this expression I don't have language for. Part relief, part wonder, like he'd been waiting for the floor to stop moving, and it finally had. He said very matter-of-factly, "So you're my mom now, for real?" "I'm your mom now, for real," I said. He nodded like that settled something important. Then he asked if we could get pancakes. We got pancakes. Daniel fought the divorce. He hired someone expensive who tried 3 different arguments, and none of them changed anything significant. He got limited visitation with Lily, which she resented, and he accepted because he had no leverage. He moved into an apartment 20 minutes away. I heard from mutual friends over the following year that Sasha had ended things with him. Apparently, she'd never wanted anything permanent, only the arrangement that worked for her. He was alone in that apartment, and by all accounts, genuinely miserable. I did not find this satisfying exactly. What I found satisfying was different. What I found satisfying was Noah, 3 months after finalization, finally stopping the shoe ritual. He stopped because he didn't need it anymore. He was 5 years old and he knew he was staying. He just stopped. One night he went to bed and didn't line them up, and I stood in the hallway looking at the jumble of little sneakers by the door, and I felt something crack open in my chest that I think was the last piece of grief from those 4 rounds of IVF and the 2 miscarriages and the surgery I don't like to talk about. He was mine. He had always been supposed to be mine. Whatever terrible route we'd taken to get there, whatever lies had been told and hands I'd trusted and floors I'd assumed were solid, we had gotten there. He was mine and I was his, and Lily called him her brother with complete certainty, the way kids claim things when they mean them. I rebuilt. That's the honest word for it. Rebuilt, not recovered, because recovery suggests going back to something. I didn't go back. I built a different version of my life in the space where the old one had been, and I'm not going to tell you it wasn't hard, because it was brutal in ways that ambushed me at odd moments for a long time. But I had 2 children and a house with good light, and a sister who showed up every Saturday for 3 months straight just to sit with me, and a lawyer brother-in-law who never sent me a bill. One evening last spring, Noah came and found me in the kitchen. He was 6 by then, bolder, funnier, with opinions about everything. He leaned against the counter and looked up at me with those dark eyes and said, "Mom, I picked you first, you know." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" He shrugged with the elaborate casualness of a 6-year-old delivering important information. "When I was at the other place, I picked you first, before anyone decided anything." He said it like it was obvious, like it had always been true. Maybe it had.